Hello, everybody. I'm Libby Smith from the Labour Campaign for International Development and the Coalition for Global Prosperity, and am honoured to be your chair this evening. Tonight's event is co-hosted by the Labour Campaign for International Development, the Fabian Society, Save the Children, and the Coalition for Global Prosperity to launch this promising development, The Future of Aid in an Uncertain World, a new collection that sets out an ambitious vision for Labour's approach to international development, and we'll be hearing from some of the collection's authors later on. So why does this all matter? Well, for me, it's because within Labour, we have a proud tradition of internationalism, a tradition of working with our neighbours to stand up for our shared values. And that tradition of solidarity is rooted in one simple belief, that every life is of equal worth. When I walked through the Bidi Bidi refugee camp in northern Uganda, I met children orphaned by the conflict in South Sudan, some as young as 9, destined to become child brides. I thought to myself, they could be my daughter. When I met teenage girls in the Zatari refugee camp on the Syrian border, desperate to go back to school, they could be my daughter. When I spoke with young girls in rural Ghana, walking hours upon hours every day to collect water, leaving no time for school, no time for fun, they too could be my daughter. It's wrong that 13 million girls around the world will never see the inside of a classroom. It's wrong that 400,000 children die of malaria every year. And it's wrong that right now 450 million children are growing up amid war. Every child deserves to grow up in safety, and we must never lose sight of the humanity behind those numbers. These aren't statistics. These are children with hopes and potential not so different from our own. We live in a time where there are voices who tell us to turn inward, close the door, and retreat to nationalism. But as Labour, we need to stand up and say clearly that is neither the moral choice nor the sensible one. As the UK looks to redefine its role in a changing world, we have a choice about what sort of nation we want to be. And I believe that great nations do that by boldly championing their values in the face of the defining challenges of our time. And that's exactly what these essays in this collection speak to, offering bold, practical ideas for Labour and how they can put these values into action. So thank you so much for all being here tonight. I know we have some fantastic organisations in the room, and it's my honour to introduce our first speakers tonight and the collection's forward authors, Heather Stuff, Chair of the Labour Campaign for International Development, and Joe Dromey, General Secretary of the Fabian Society.
Good evening, everybody. Please don't laugh at the height difference between Joe and I, which is considerable. So we were slightly concerned that tonight would be a little bit like the Oscars, with Joe and I doing a slight double act. Hopefully be much more informative for you and much more fun as well. My first job is to thank CGP and Save the Children and the Fabians for collaborating with the Labour Campaign for International Development this evening. We couldn't have done this without your support, so thank you very much for this and for your partnership. The Labour Campaign for International Development is the only socialist society that is solely dedicated to the campaigning for international development and a world free from poverty. We were committed to internationalism from the very beginning and still are, and we're very proud of that, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. We were also founded by David Taylor, now Member of Parliament, who's sitting on the second row. Well done, David. So, congratulations. We were founded in 2009 to ensure that development remains at the heart of a Labour Party agenda. Again, this is something we are proud of, is something we will not stop campaigning for. We live in challenging times with shifting needs and with what can seem insurmountable obstacles. Cuts to aid impacting on women and girls, health, refugee flows, and climate changes. While we know the fiscal constraints on budget, we hope that there will be a return to increased spending in the future. And with the attention on Denmark and migration policy today, it's perhaps something for us all to reflect and acknowledge that they do indeed contribute 0.7 to ODA spend. So it was with these challenges in mind that led to executive members Rulin, Layla and myself initially developing and pursuing the idea of an essay collection. And there's a great deal of thanks to the tenacity of exec member Gideon Coulin and of Fabian Iggy Wood for their endless edits and putting up with my pedantic and particularly detailed language usage. A collection that promotes challenge. It's a call for hope, not based in sound bites or easy fixes that some might offer, but it's a hope born from hard graft, lived experience, and acknowledgement of changing times, and the desire to find and offer practical, workable solutions. It's an essay collection that I'm incredibly proud also acknowledges the lived experience that we have in this room. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm really excited that we will be hearing from you today as well. Now, on ELSID, we're a socialist society. We know that while we seek to campaign and promote our area of interest, we are significantly stronger collectively. We are at our best in the labour movement when we work together. And that is why I am deeply grateful to have been partnering with the Fabian Society and the fact that they came on board with this. This essay collection here is the start of a conversation. It's not the end of one. And I hope that we'll see many more of this happening before and again. And on that, I'd like to hand to my partner in crime, my my large to my little, actually, the General Secretary of the Fabians, my now very good friend, Jo Dromley. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name's Jo Dromley, and I'm the General Secretary of the Fabian Society. So we're a socialist society and a think tank. And together with Labour Campaign for International Development, we put together this fantastic pamphlet. At the Fabian Society, you may have heard of us on the kind of deepest, darkest reaches of the far-right social media about us controlling the UK and the world. Unfortunately, that is not the case, but what we do is we put together pamphlets like this which discuss ideas about how we can make our country a better place to live in. And we believe that ideas matter and that change is possible. So we support debate and discussion on the left about how we can build a better world with greater equality of power, opportunity, and wealth. And these principles do not stop at our borders. So core to our values is a commitment to internationalism and to sustainable development. So we were really delighted to work on this project. As Heather said, the UK and the Labour Party have a proud record on international development, but that is a record that is at stake, both for our country and our party. And recent years have seen the political consensus that we helped build around international development fray, and we've seen popular support for aid decline. Our collection brought together voices from across the left to explore both how we can make the most of investment in the short term, but crucially how we can rebuild that consensus in the years ahead. And we're delighted that both the current Minister for International Development, two of her predecessors, and a former Foreign Secretary contributed to the collection. I'm really looking forward to hearing some of them today. I wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who wrote for the collection, and I'm really looking forward to hearing many of you today. It was also a pleasure to work with the Labour Campaign for International Development, particularly Heather and Gideon. And I wanted to, again, thank Save the Children, Betterworld Foundation, and the Coalition for Global Prosperity. He's already had a shout-out, but a massive thank you to my colleague Iggy Wood, who put together this fantastic collection. And finally, all of our work is only possible because of the partners that we work with and our thousands of members across the UK. So if you share our values, if you share our commitment to ideas and to building a better world, please do join the Fabian Society today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jo and Heather. I'd now like to welcome two individuals who have flown all the way from Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo to be with us tonight, Finian Ali and Nana Yahari, who are youth coordinators of the Scaling Up Nutrition Civil Society Youth Network and are doing incredible work in Nigeria and DRC. Please welcome.
Thank you, everyone. and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Finian Ali, and I have a speech that I've written down here that I was hoping to read, but when I came in and interacted with a couple of gentlemen in the house, I felt like I should speak naturally. So, first, when I received the invitation that I would be speaking here today, there were two things that came to my mind. My first instinct was gratitude, and then the second was worry. I was worried because how can I possibly come to this room and paint a picture of hunger in a room where every table is full? So I was truly, really worried. I was also worried, how can I maybe try to honor the dignity of young people across Africa and all over the world, marginalized communities who may never step into this room. So they were really big for me. And then I remembered a kind of a lived experience, a story that I would like to share. I am from Enugu-Ezike, and that is in the southeastern part of Nigeria. So there was a young boy I met in one of the communities there. His name is Ifeanyi, just about 8 years old, skinny legs, with bright eyes and dust on his feet. And then I asked the young lad, I said, "What have you had for the day?" And then, he looked at the mother and then looked at me and whispered and said, "Onwelego, no, Onwego, Nigeria." That means nothing yet, but maybe later. It's a local dialect. And then later for Ifeanyi, it was not just maybe after school. Later for him is like, maybe if we have food, we'll eat, but if we don't, no problem. So Ifeanyi is not unusual. That's the reality of millions of young people, children, across the world. And stories of Ifeanyi and so many other young people across the country where we work, and even in Nigeria, has inspired our writing the essay. So aid is not just charity. Sometimes I tell myself that what's the truest way to show that you are emotionally intelligent? And I say maybe when you show empathy and kindness, then maybe that could be a good way to demonstrate that you are emotionally intelligent. So for millions of young people, hope is counted in hours. Like, go to the clinic, and then you are able to see the midwife, and you'll be like, "Oh, thank God, I arrived early." They've not gone because the program has not been cut off. Or you are looking for ready-to-use therapeutic food for your children that are suffering from severe acute malnutrition, and then you go to the CIMAM centers, and then fortunately it arrives right on time, and you'll be like, "Thank God, thank God." So all these lived realities inspired us to write these essays. And when I got feedback from my colleague, Sean, who has been supporting us, that the essay that Nana and I have written have been accepted, submitted, and was quite successful, we felt truly humbled. And then the invitation to come to speak here, it was not just an honor, it was a recognition, not recognition of the work we do actually, but even the voices of millions of young people that, we bear the burden of speaking on their behalf. Like, we've led over 57 community dialogues in Nigeria with young people, different demography, people with disabilities, adolescent girls, teenagers who are pregnant, nursing mothers, and they've shared their lived experiences around the challenges they face. So we are burdened by their challenges. So each time we have opportunity to speak like this, it's a way of fulfilling and making their voices to be heard. So I want to remind us that for decades ago, UK has been a strong not just a donor. If I say donor, that would be an understatement, but you've passed a strong message to the world. When ODA was at 0.7, you're just telling the world that we see you. Hey, we see you. Your children matters. You're telling the world that your future matters and that they are not alone. So when the funds started cutting down, you're also passing a message. It's just the tone. It may not be verbal, but passing a message. And millions of people lose their life because aid is being cut. Like, that's the reality. It's not just about money. It's not really money. Millions lose their life. Some hopes are dashed forever. And I think that we need to reclaim that pace-setter position that we've had. When we restore ODA at 0.7%, we try to protect the future. And most importantly for Nana and I is about protecting global trust, because that is even the hardest thing, even harder than budgets. Because if I can't trust you and you can't trust me, the partnership is not there, and the global cooperation is not there, we're going to fail. So I want to close by saying that I'm also a product of UK Aid, and that I stand today to speak to you and you are listening, and it looks like I'm making sense. It's because of the investment that UK Aid did on me too, and I would like to say that so that I can close out for my colleague to take over. 2013, I was an undergraduate. I was first year in the university. And in 2014, there was a program that came to my school, Enugu State University of Science and Technology. It was funded by DFID then, and the name of the program is Voices for Change. They came to the school, and the big goal was kind of reorientation, mindset shift on healthy gender expressions and on healthy masculinities. And I come from a community in Enugu that we have extant cultural traditions, and patriarchy is very high. Like, there are things you can't tell me that a woman should do. I will frown at you. That was how I was trained. So they started with the purpose safe space sessions, and then we started aligning. I was the best because the program made impact in me. For the other colleagues who were part of the program, it was just normal. But for me, I was challenging them. Why do you think I should take consent? Consent, why? What for? I was challenging them. It wasn't my fault. It was how I was trained. It's my socialization. It's my upbringing. So I changed. Maybe if that program was not there, maybe there could be a lot of violations, expression, the kind of attitude I will live, the kind of values I will hold, maybe such that put women down, that put systems down, So, but today, there have been it has inspired me to get into being more humanity first, impact, and make life better. So I truly want to say that as global cooperation is seemingly shrinking, for us, we believe that if UK comes back to that position of courage, compassion, and even, position of international strength, that will really be of great importance to the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Finen. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to read because I used to speak French, so I put my ideas on the paper, sorry. So the Democratic Republic of Congo, like many countries affected by war, is living through a reality that makes humanitarian aid more, not just important, but absolutely essential for local communities. More than 30 years, armed conflict has continued to tear apart the country. This conflict creates and maintains deep instability within the state institution, but also in families and entry communities. Behind every statistic, there is a real person, a mother, a father, a child, whose life has been turned upside down. Millions of people have lost the income, the stability, and the activity that once allowed them to support their families. Many have been forced to flee the house overnight, leaving behind them not only belongings, but also their dream, their projects, and the life they work hard to build. When people lose their homes, they're not just losing physical space, they lose the sense of safety, the identity, and often the dignity. These are situations that nobody anywhere in the world should ever have to experience. The support provided by the United Kingdom plays a critical role in helping these displaced families. It restores hope when hope feels impossible. It helps families access health care, food, shelter, and the basic service that every human being deserves. More than that, this support helps reduce a deep inequality that have been worsened by the conflict. It brings back sense of dignity to people who have been stripped of almost everything. Reducing this funding would mean abandoning countless lives that can still be saved. It would mean turning away from people who didn't choose the circumstances and who are simply fighting to survive. Being born in a certain place should never mean dying too early. No child should grow up believing that their life matters less because of where they were born. We must act in the name of humanity. We must choose compassion over indifference. By supporting vulnerable community, we affirm that every life has value and every person deserves protection, and that hope must never be taken away. Every life counts, and together we can have the power to protect communities. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Finny and Nana, for those really inspiring words and the incredible work you're doing in both Nigeria and DRC. I'm now delighted to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Jeevan Sunda MP, who is Member of Parliament for Loughborough and Parliamentary Private Secretary at the Department for Business and Trade. Jeevan also provided an essay for tonight's collection. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeevan Sunda.
Thank you, friend. It's so wonderful to be here. Finian and Nana, thank you so much for that, for your contribution, for all the work that you've done. It's so incredibly powerful. It reminds us all exactly why we are here. Thank you so much to Joe, to Iggy, to Heather for all the work that you've put together to get this together, to put it to this table, to put it before us. Most of all, from my perspective, thank you to Gideon, unbelievably clever, unbelievably kind. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done, all the work you continue to do in this sector, the huge contribution you have still to make. It's so exciting to see, and we're so incredibly thankful. Thank you. Clearly, these are difficult and dangerous times that we're living in. International crises and summits, a chancellor having a very difficult budget, people looking at senior cabinet ministers, Blairites, examining their every single move. But enough about David. He enjoyed that. It is a difficult time for us all. Look, these are the most dangerous times that our country has seen for at least a century. We're seeing before us a burning planet. We're seeing before us war in Europe, but of course also an affordability crisis that, although we talk about affecting us here at home, is affecting everyone across the globe, and especially the poorest people on the planet. And why we are here also is because who we are as members of the Labour Party, that our values are that every single person should be able to live a decent life. And while we accept that we have a greater obligation to those within our borders, we accept that also that we have a contribution, or rather an obligation, to everyone across the world, that morally and instrumentally we all do better when everybody on this planet does better. And that's why we're all here in this room, and that's why we're all here in this moment. For me in particular, look, I grew up in this country and I was privileged to do so. But my dad, he grew up in rural India. He was just born after the end of the Second World War, at a time when 1 in 4 people, 1 in 4 children would die before their 5th birthday. But then we think about how much has changed in that time, how much has changed in our lifetimes. By the time I was born, 1 in 3 people lived in extreme poverty. When it was my dad, it was almost 70%. And now it's 1 in 10. In the years in 2010, thanks in part to the huge work of the past Labour government, thanks in huge part because of your work, David, we were within touching distance of ending extreme poverty. And it's the work that you did then, and it's the work that you carried on forward, and we're so incredibly appreciative for it. But of course, we are also here at a time when actually, although the end of poverty was in sight, it feels ever further away and is getting ever further away as we stand here. We face in this country, or rather in this globe, 3 challenges that set back the poorest nations on earth. Firstly, after the pandemic, a huge reduction in revenues, an economic crisis that affected all of us, that while we had furloughs, the poorest countries in the world did not, and faced a huge impact because of it. We saw commodity prices increase. We saw what hit us as an energy crisis, mean poverty around the world. And we saw rising interest rates lead to higher and higher debt burdens for the poorest nations on earth. Now, it is true, of course, that in this country we are reducing our contribution to aid. But there is so much more that we can do, even with a reduced aid budget. And I say this because after I left university, one of the reasons I did development was precisely because of the huge amount of work that I saw that new Labour government do. And after I left the Treasury, I went to Somaliland, one of the poorest nations on earth. And I worked there in the Ministry of Finance for 2 years as an economist. I think their only economist at the time. And I was there during their worst drought in living memory. And that was incredibly difficult, as you can imagine. And the choices between paying soldiers or feeding children, those were the choices before us. But what I did see in Somaliland as well was a nation that was being built from its own revenues. Because the way we end poverty across the world, whilst we help, of course, with the programs we build, is for nations that are able to build to sustain themselves and then ensure they are able to spend on the kind of things that help their people lift out of poverty, make policies for their nations. No taxation without representation. Indeed, when a country is dependent, or rather knows it has an obligation towards its own citizenry, that is how we've seen development happen over the past 50 years. We think about the huge reductions in poverty and extreme poverty in China and India. This was a message about strong states building and enacting policies on their side. And that's exactly what the last Labour government helped to do, and it's exactly what this Labour government is doing as well, building those states. And in particular this time, a real contribution for the kind of work we're doing to reduce the dependence, or rather the problem, of extreme debt, of debt that countries can't deal with, of debts they cannot renegotiate. And there's a huge amount of good work done by Jenny and those in the Treasury to help ensure that actually those countries are able to renegotiate that debt and do in the same way as a business is able to do. Because when countries are spending 1 in 5 every single dollar on debt they cannot renegotiate, when 17 out of 32 African nations are spending more on debt repayments than they are on healthcare, they are not spending on the kind of investments that can help build and develop those nations, reduce extreme poverty for good. The last new Labour government cancelled £30 billion of debt at Gleneagles. They had the private bill as well. They did a huge amount to help nations build themselves and reduce extreme poverty. And that's why underneath the last Labour government we saw that the number of children under 5 dying went down by 1/3, that we became this close to ending extreme poverty. It is still within our sight and within our gift. We can absolutely help end extreme poverty in this generation, to ensure that people aren't scratching in the dirt, desperately hoping that something will grow so they can feed their children. That is something we can do. And for us, the United Kingdom, to lead as we have done, for us as a Labour government to do so on our values and to take the kind of action that every single person, not only in this country, but on this planet, can live a decent life. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeevan. Next, I'd like to welcome the Right Honourable Annalise Dodds MP. Annalise is Member of Parliament for Oxford East and has held a number of positions both in the government and the shadow cabinet. Most recently, she was the Foreign Office Minister responsible for international development, a role she stood down from early this year following the announced aid cuts. Please welcome Annalise Dodds.
Thank you very much indeed. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. It really is. And I was absolutely delighted to be asked to contribute to this excellent pamphlet. Please do read it if you haven't already, because I think there are some very important contributions in there. And of course, it's coming at a critically important juncture. I believe there's a crisis of confidence, both within the development community, but also often amongst politicians in terms of how they talk, not just about development, but more broadly about our foreign relations. And I think that crisis has to end, because until we end it, we will not be delivering in our own country's interests. I think very often when we talk about these matters, we do make those comparisons as Labour with our party's past. And I'm absolutely delighted that we have someone present who's shaping the present and indeed the future, I'm sure, as well as having shaped the past of the party in the form of David Miliband. But of course, and he's written about this eloquently before, and Jeevan referred to it too, very often comparison is made between, for example, the current government's approach to development and that between 1997 and 2010. And there will be analyses of, well, what's changed? Why are we seeing difference? I agree with a lot of the commentary about this, but I profoundly disagree with some of it as well. And I'm going to set that out quickly before saying what I believe we need to do now. First of all, and it's already been mentioned by Jeevan, and David's written very eloquently about this too, we've seen a concentration of extreme poverty, a much stronger link between extreme poverty and conflict, and of course now also the climate crisis that was far less of a concern when Labour was last in government because it was less of an objective reality. We're seeing pressure on the multilateral system, clearly from the withdrawal and sometimes active disruption that's coming from the current US administration, but we're also seeing new actors becoming more involved in this arena, actors which have a variety of views about the merits of the multilateral system. We see Gulf countries, for example, becoming much more significant within humanitarian and development contexts. We see other countries as well from the global south increasingly leading. And I'm sorry if I seem very sleep deprived, that's because I am. I've just come back from Brazil this morning. Should have been yesterday, but never mind. I haven't seen a bed since Friday, but don't feel too sorry for me. We've seen there, of course, how they've been leading the debate around forestry issues, just as I would argue they have sought to lead the debate globally around hunger and done so effectively within the G20. And indeed, they have been donors to the new forest fund that's been set up, as well as Indonesia. So that constellation has changed. And some of the politics has changed, but I would argue, actually, not all of it. There has always been a right-wing critique of development and of aid. Of course, it is different now. It has parliamentary representation with one political party now represented in the House of Commons, which is explicitly committed to reducing aid and doing so very significantly. Of course, a major political party, the Conservatives, which have also said they would reduce it, but to a lesser extent. But that has been there before. We see now, I would argue, also a critique of development from the left that was less in evidence between 1997 and 2010. And I believe that has contributed to the crisis in confidence that I met before. I think much of that left critique, and I set this out in my article, is based on an outdated view of how development is generally conducted, certainly by the UK nowadays. Nonetheless, it's part of the context we have to acknowledge. When we see that overall context, I think there are some clear lessons. We need to be far more sophisticated, and we need to do three things that I believe are morally right to do, as well as in our country's interest and the interest of the world's poorest people. First, we have to have a ruthless focus on efficiency and on national pride. Secondly, we must deliver equal partnership. And finally, we've got to be transparent about the political nature of development. We've got to have a confident focus on effectiveness and national pride. There's been much ink spilled by different organisations suggesting that the British public think A, B, C or D about development. Understandably, very often they will have asked the public, do you want to spend on our area of concern? And when they're told what that spending can achieve, generally the public say yes. So this does not necessarily get us to where we need to be understanding public opinion. I believe there will always be, given the extent of UK aid, the odd programme that the political right can critique, and we of course need to remove any indefensible uses of taxpayers' money. Certainly I was focused on that when I was a minister. But we have to defend the vast majority of what the UK achieves, and we can't do that secretly. We have to talk politically about what development does. Not just the amount that is spent, but why it's spent, what it does, what it achieves, why that's in our national interest. Not overclaim, but be explicit about the outcomes it delivers. That includes, I would say, in response to Heather's point, in relation to migration. If anyone's particularly interested in this, I've written about this for the Future Governance Forum, and if the government, particularly today, wants to adopt any of those suggestions, I think that imitation would be the sincerest form of flattery. I'm very proud also of the fact that Brits have played a huge role when it comes to both the past of aid, but also its present, and I hope its future as well. And that's why I mentioned national pride. When we're able to explain what ordinary Brits are able to achieve, whether they're medics, aid workers, experts, business people around the world, there's huge public support for that. They're far more effective message carriers often than politicians. And I would say the same is true also of members of the military, who were some of the strongest advocates against the cut in aid that we've seen recently. Secondly, we do need to focus on equal partnership. And that is not just about development, but it is about our whole demeanour as a country. The tectonic plates have undoubtedly shifted, both economically and politically. But I think too often we still behave in the UK, let's be honest, as if the world revolves around Europe and Washington. Some issues do, but many don't. I was speaking recently with the foreign policy advisor for Senegal, and she kept using the same word, choices, that her country had choices. I believe that we haven't fully reflected on that. So many countries and their populations will be instinctively pro-British, and that's genuine because of the values that they believe we hold to, because of our expertise. But if we fail to accord countries and people respect and that value of dignity that was mentioned so powerfully earlier, that will immediately be felt. On big issues, some of those that Jeevan mentioned, the treatment of debt, I would add taxation, representation of the Global South and multilateral bodies as well, and also on trade, the UK must work in partnership with Global South countries and not behave as if there's somehow a centre and a periphery. I'll put this in brutal terms. I think we're in severe danger of getting this wrong in terms of where we're placing our issue attention, and in doing so will harm our national interest as well as the interests of the world's poorest people. Finally, we have to be transparent about the political nature of development. Now, I don't mean here subservience to the punch and judy show of day-to-day politics. I think raiding the aid budget just so that a politician has got an announceable when they go somewhere is not sensible. It doesn't lead to long-term partnership that we need to be creating, unless we're talking purely about the humanitarian context where we're trying to crowd in other donors by doing so. But we've got to be frank, development is not apolitical, it's not purely technical, it affects who's got power and how they can use it. If a country like the UK focuses, for example, on empowering women and girls, as I believe it should do, that will have an impact on how much power they have. And that applies to just about every development intervention we can imagine. Contrary to many, and perhaps to many people in this audience, I never wanted the two partners in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office to divorce. I wanted them to get on a damn sight better with each other, but I didn't want them to walk away. And I think that's even more important now. We see now development which is increasingly politicised. We've seen the weaponisation of aid, disregard also for international norms. That shouldn't be the case, but the reality is, whether we're talking about Gaza, Sudan or Yemen, without diplomatic engagement to get aid to those who need it, we would simply be failing some of the world's poorest people. And indeed we are, I would argue, as an international community right now. And finally, we have to have respect and show that constantly in the politics of development from the UK. Research into African leaders and civil society actors show that they want to work with countries like the UK, including on development, but they want transparency and honesty about why we're engaged. We need to be honest that there is a national interest for us in this, and suggesting that there isn't will only be viewed, rightly, as hypocritical. In conclusion, a strong focus on effectiveness of development and linking it with national pride, equal partnership and transparency about the political nature of aid were all important before the cut to aid, but I believe they're even more critical now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annalise. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this evening, the Right Honourable David Miliband. David is President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee, where he oversees their operations in over 40 crisis-affected countries and their refugee assistant work across Europe and the Americas. Before joining IRC, David had a distinguished career in UK politics, including serving as the 74th Foreign Secretary. His work has earned him wide acclaim. In the words of former President Bill Clinton, they said, David is one of the ablest, most creative public servants of our time. David is also one of the most prominent and powerful champions of international development today, and we're very fortunate to have him with us. Please welcome Right Honourable David Miliband.
Thank you very much. That is way too kind. I almost thought you were going to utter the chilling words, our speaker today needs no introduction, because when that happened to me as the MP for South Shields in 2002, I'd just been made Minister for Schools, and the department said, we really need to get you out amongst kids, amongst teachers, amongst parents. We need to show that you're a man of the people. And so I said, well, it so happens I've got a constituency visit at St Mary's Primary School in South Shields on Friday. Let's invite the national media there, etc. And I arrived, the head teacher was waiting for me. She said, we're so honoured that you're here. Those of you who know South Shields, it has the oldest daily provincial newspaper in the country, the South Shields Gazette. And all over town, Minister Miliband visits the Tyne was the headline. And went into the school hall, 150 kids sitting on the floor, arms crossed, not quite fingers on their lips, but almost. And the headmistress said, now, children, our speaker today needs no introduction. Can anyone tell me who our speaker is? Those of you who've been around politics will know that, of course, there was deathly silence. And the headmistress said, now, children, we did practice this yesterday. So, having arrived, maybe thinking too much of my new position, she then said, someone must be able to tell us. This man's come, he's going to make a big difference to our school. We've been waiting a long time for this kind of visitor. You know the needs of the school. Someone, and fortunately a little boy put up his hand in the front row, in the sort of third row, he must have been 7 or 8, and she said, oh, yes, Johnny, thank you, tell me. He said, Miss, is it the man who's come to fix the electricity? And so Thank you for not saying I need no introduction. I do not feel like the keynote speaker, if I may say so, as the 8th or 9th speaker. Finian and Nana, if you are the future of Nigeria and the Democratic Republic of Congo, then the future of those countries is very bright indeed. So thank you very much for inspiring me and all of us this evening. But I can't help feel that I'm something of a museum piece to be described for the past. I just want to say this. The things that we did in government were not intended to be there as relics for future governments to look back on and praise. They were there to inspire future governments to tell us what we got wrong and then do better. And I come to this very much in that spirit, because the truth is we're living at a time when, on the one hand, we've got a Labour government of a majority of 145, which is an extraordinary achievement of this generation of political leaders and politicians, which even you included, all of the MPs. The whole party rallied for an extraordinary success. But we're living at a time when autocracy is on the march around the world, more autocracies than democracies. The World Bank is upgrading its assessment of the number of people living in extreme poverty. Small L liberal societies are becoming less liberal, if you look at any of the global indicators on this. When impunity is on the march in all sorts of ways, when we've needed international cooperation more than ever, but it seems the hardest thing to find. And so I think that we've got to be honest about that moment that we're living in the way that the speakers have tonight. Because you'd think it was obvious that the world is more connected than ever before. And we know that from our own lives. We can see that in every newspaper story, in every interaction. You can see global connectivity, but at a time of global connectivity that is unsurpassed in human history, the amount of commitment to global integration, global cooperation is reduced. And in a way, the aid cut was a symptom of that, not just a driver of it. And I think it's important to see that. And I've tried to think about why this is happening, and I'll come to some of the tactical reasons in a moment. But I was really pleased that every one of the speakers spoke about their values, not just their interests. And as I think about this moment in politics, especially in international politics, we're a more united world, or a more connected world is a better way of putting it, a more connected world than ever before. But when it comes to empathy, we seem to be more divided than ever before. Maybe empathy is not quite the right word. I don't like the word compassion. I don't think that's the right word either. But empathy feels more divided. And there's this phrase that I saw in the New York Times, which I think defines what we're against. And that phrase is the tribalization of pain. It says that if you're in my tribe and you're suffering, I care about you. But if you're in someone else's tribe or in another tribe, then it's someone else's problem. I think that's what we stand against. We say, no, we're the human tribe. And whatever your race or your religion or your nationality or your ethnicity, if you're in trouble and I can do something about it, we were all brought up to believe and think it's our responsibility to do something about it. And I think it's very important that as we come to some, if you like, policy issues, we don't forget the moral impulse that you expressed so well in your introduction here, which is that we're here for a reason. With power comes responsibility. With ability comes responsibility. And without ever falling into the trap that somehow our country are the authors of other people's fortunes, which is a danger, we recognize that we have to choose sides and we need to be on the right side when it comes to big global questions. And the fact that the geography of poverty is now focused on conflict states, like Nigeria and DRC, sad to say, northern Nigeria and eastern DRC, but the fact that the geography of poverty is focused on conflict, and conflict is increasingly overlapping with the climate crisis, and that conflict and the climate crisis, when they come together, impoverish countries to put them in the kind of debt trap that they're in, what you see is a syndrome that calls on us to use our policy imagination as we've never used it before. And I was honoured to be asked to contribute to the publication, and I was really pleased to do so. But more important, I wanted to read what other people were saying, because we need to fertilise our imaginations at the moment, because these are complex problems, not simple problems. And I just want to talk a little bit about the way I'm beginning to think about this, and without ever pretending that this is the answer. First point, I think, is really important, which is that there's a danger when we talk about development that we think the word aid is synonymous with the word development. Whereas actually the truth is that development, which means the growing average incomes, if it's measured anyway, the growing average incomes of countries, you're never going to drive up your average income through aid. The marginal dollar spent on development is going to achieve less than the marginal dollar spent on tackling poverty. And they're not exactly the same thing, because some of the countries that are fastest developing at the moment also have some of the greatest amounts of poverty. I mean, Nigeria is actually a telling example of that. I think I'm right in saying there are more extreme poor living in Nigeria today than in India, even though the population of Nigeria is a quarter of the population of India. So you can see that there are some challenging dynamics here. And so I think when Javine talks about debt, you're absolutely right, because that's fundamental. But let's also be honest that the drivers of development are good governance, property rights, markets that work in the interests of people, not in the interests of those who are exploiting them. International engagement through remittances is an important driver of development. Inward investment is a big driver of development, but so is indigenous economic growth. The aid part of that equation may be concessional loans. It may be extra help for those who are most left behind for a social safety net. But the truth is that when we founded the drive against global poverty in the mid to late 90s, 10 or 20% of the world's extreme poor lived in conflict states. And today, 60% of the world's extreme poor live in conflict states. And if you're in a conflict state, the marginal dollar, the marginal pound, the marginal euro is the difference between getting your malnutrition treatment or not getting it. So it's a life and death issue. So the first thing I think we have to think about is when we say development, let's not presume that we mean aid. Different. Second point, where's aid going? 25% of the world's aid goes on health and humanitarian aid. Now, I thought we were good at politics. When you ask the public whether they support aid for humanitarian efforts or for health, you get very large numbers of people saying, yes, they do support that. I don't want to shock you. I'm glad that a lot of you are sitting down. 89% of the much dismissed American public, 89%, including 84% of Republicans and 94% of Democrats, 89% of the American public think that it would be right for 1% of the federal budget to be spent on foreign aid. The actual amount that's spent is more or less 1% of the federal budget. So you'd think there'd be a lot of support for foreign aid. But when you ask how much do you think the American government spends on foreign aid, more than half think more than 20% of the federal budget goes on foreign aid. So we've not been good at the politics of this. We've neither got the aid budget focused on the popular bits, nor have we persuaded the public how much is spent. I haven't got the equivalent figures for the UK. I don't think the question's been asked. I couldn't find the question being asked in the same way. So we've got to put our political thinking caps on. Third point, I was so pleased that Annalise referred to this. one of the ironies of the cuts in the aid budget is that we have more evidence than ever before about what works in aid. Not just in development aid, but in humanitarian aid as well. I'm biased. My own organization does about 20 to 25% of all the impact evaluations in the humanitarian sector. And we know a lot about how to deliver vaccinations in conflict, malnutrition treatments in conflict, prevention of violence against women and girls in conflict and against kids, by the way, education in conflict. We know a lot more about how to build climate resilience in conflict. I mean, it's obvious we did a study in northern Nigeria. If you give people aid before a climate event strikes, they make much better use of the money than if you just give it to them after the climate event strikes. And actually, we know how to do that. So this evidence point that you raised, Annalise, is incredibly important. We can't let the lie get 100 times around the world before we get our boots on to say, no, we actually do know where aid goes. We know how to do it right. Fourth thing, which hasn't been mentioned, but which I think is important, not just because every speech today needs to mention AI, but we are living through an extraordinary technological revolution, and if we're not careful, it will widen inequalities rather than narrow them. I'm incredibly proud. We are, at the moment, the IRC is using AI to diagnose monkeypox by taking photos of lesions on people's bodies in the Democratic Republic of Congo and diagnosing whether they've got monkeypox in 5 minutes rather than the 2 weeks that it previously took to get a sample to Kinshasa and get an answer and get the answer back. There are 200 rare diseases in Africa that have never been mapped in any health diagnostic system. We're determined to do that. We think we can do that. So I want to just flag, let's be self-critical about the way in which aid is delivered. Some of the criticism is misplaced. 97% of our staff are local hires. We've got 400 Sudanese working for us in Sudan. 90% of them are internally displaced people themselves who sort of suffered from the civil war, the largest humanitarian crisis. But other critiques that we're too stuck, that we're not leapfrogging forward in the way in which we conceive of the way that aid should be delivered. Let's put that right. I don't want to go on about the value for money piece because you've covered it very well, Annalise. I think it's very important. I just want everyone to remember $2, sorry not to have it in pounds, £1.60, $2 or £1.60 to deliver a vaccine in Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia and Ethiopia today. And we've delivered 24 million of them on a contract from Gavi who said, we know there are 2 million zero-dose kids in those 4 countries, but they're in conflict zones, so we can't reach them through governments. Can you reach them? We've reached them for $2 a shot. So let's use our examples well. I just want to finish on the following point. In the last, I never went to business school, but I'm the CEO of an organization which built itself up from being a $500 million organization to being a $1.5 billion organization in the space of 10 years. It's not because of me, but because of the work that was done by my colleagues. Now, though, and I wish I had gone to business school in a way, we've lost $400 million in the last 8 months. That's cuts in federal funding from the US government, $400 million. Don't worry, I'm not going to make an appeal for you to fill the gap. What I want to talk about is how, despite the fact that we've lost $400 million, 35% of our income, we're on the front foot, not the back foot, at the International Rescue Committee. We are moving forward with new support in new ways, not moving backwards, losing focus on our mission, or somehow giving away the principles that brought us into being in the first place. We were founded by Albert Einstein as an organization to help rescue people from Nazi-occupied Europe in the 1930s. So we've got the innovation gene. We were forging passports for people like Marc Chagall to get out of Nazi-occupied France in 1940. But the sense of mission that has come from being under siege is very, very strong. And we're not the only organization that is under siege in the US at the moment. But the sense of commitment to the mission has brought out entrepreneurialism, care, commitment, partnerships of a really quite extraordinary kind. And we're down to $1.1 billion for this fiscal year that we start our fiscal year on October the 1st. But let's not fall for the claim that when the money goes down, we go out of business. Because the needs don't go away. And we said on day one, if you're a child in a malnutrition center that we're running in Nigeria or anywhere else, we're not going to close that malnutrition center come hell or high water. If you're a kid in the US legal system who's got an asylum claim and we're your legal representative, we're not going to abandon you. And we've been learning through that process, about how to find new ways of describing what we do, new ways of finding partners in what we do. And while we haven't yet built back the $400 million, we're determined to make this a teachable moment. And in a way, that's what we're going through at the moment. I think that's what the pamphlet is about. We've got to be understanding the political moment we're in, and then we've got to be driving forward the way in which we work and the way in which we operate to put our values into practice. And this leads me to what I finish on. When people say to me, what's the difference between being in politics and being in running an NGO? Obviously, you have less power if you're in an NGO than if you're in politics, but actually you have more freedom of maneuver. But the more important thing is this. If you're in politics, and it'd be interesting if this resonates with the two of you since you're the active politicians here. When you're in politics, you can see the big picture. The danger is you lose sight of the people. If you're running an NGO, you're confronted with the people every day. The danger is that you lose sight of the big picture. And what I think is the message of these essays is twofold. One, that we've got to join the granular, the people, with the big picture. We've got to diagnose the big trends, but we've got to show how they apply locally in people's lives. But then something else, which is what I'll finish on. When I was in politics, I used to say that hope should lead us to action. Now I think I got it wrong. What I've learned in the NGO sector is that it's action that leads to hope. And writing a pamphlet is action. Engaging in your local community is action. Joining Labour campaign for international development, being part of global campaigns is action. And this is really the big lesson of losing $400 million. You can stew about it, or you can do something about it. And I think what unites this group of people is why I wanted to be here today. I'm not going to claim I flew in specially for this meeting, that might be a bit. But what unites us is that we're ready to take action as a way of sustaining hope. And I think that's really important at the moment. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, David, for ending our evening with such an inspiring note and such a clear call to action for all of us here in the room. And thank you to all of tonight's speakers. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to all of the co-hosts for organising tonight's event, especially to Galai. Please do all join us. We have the room next door where we'll be having a drinks reception to carry on tonight's discussion. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you'll have a lovely evening. Thank you.